Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we are going to be breaking down the Week 8 Saturday main slate of college football DFS for the 2024 season, and we're going to take a look at all 12 games on the DraftKings main slate, but these thoughts also apply to FanDuel as well, and tell you what you need to be looking at from each game. I tell you what players you need to be looking out for in each game in order to build some winning DFS lineups on DraftKings and FanDuel for this Saturday. Now, we were able to, early in the week, get our video out for the Tuesday night slate, which is actually ongoing as I'm recording this here on Tuesday night. But the Wednesday slate we weren't able to have time for. I'm not sure if we're going to have time to do the Thursday or the Friday slates this week. As I mentioned in the previous weeks, I'm starting to enter my busy season here. So I don't know if I'm going to have all the midweek slates covered, but I do know that I'm going to be able to have all the Saturday main slates and all the Saturday night slates covered for you guys. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. That way you can be with us for all the episodes that drop, whether the midweek slates for, the Conference USA games that are now taking place on Tuesday and Wednesday, as well as, the Saturday main slates that we all know and love. So if you're subscribed to the channel, you'll know when all of those drop. And if these videos help you out in any way, please hit the like button on YouTube, as well as rate and review the audio feed. It really does help me out a ton when you guys do that. Now, I got to be honest, I'm still feeling a little bit under the weather, whatever sickness I've had for the past week. I just haven't been able to kick it yet, but we're here to record this episode. We've got 12 games to talk about. I'm going to power through it. I'm going to get you guys what you need to know. Let's go ahead and dive in. We got 12 games to get to. We don't have any time to waste. Just a forewarning, if there are any random stops and starts in this video, just know that it was because I did have, in fact, a coughing fit from this sickness, and I don't want any of those to get on the video. But, had a little bit of cough syrup, feeling good, so hopefully that won't have to happen a whole lot. Anyway, 12 games to get to. Game number 1 is going to be Auburn taking on Missouri. Missouri is 4.5-point favorites in this one with a game total of 51.5 points, which is a pretty solid total in all honesty. The projected score in this one is Missouri 28-24. I got to be honest. Oh, also, when we do implied totals, we never do decimal points for points. We always round up. You can't actually go score 0.25 of a point. So I don't feel the need to include those in my implied totals. So basically, the projected score for this one is about 28-24 in favor of Missouri. I got to be honest, I have no idea how this game is going to play out. Auburn is just an absolute wild card. Missouri has looked not great against mediocre teams. They've looked awful against good teams. And I don't know what Auburn is. I don't know if Auburn is good, bad, mediocre, somewhere in between. So this is a game that has a truly wide range of outcomes. What we do know for the Auburn side is that Peyton Thorne is going to be starting quarterback, and he has had some successful games this year. Even the Oklahoma game, that's a pretty good defense, and he ended up with 29 fantasy points. I think he's a little bit of a sneaky play on DraftKings. He's not one of my favorite plays. It's kind of an ugly click, but he's a guy that nobody is going to be owned. He's going to come in at low ownership, and this game environment could get pretty good. So I think he's actually a pretty sneaky play. I don't know if I'm going to make it or not, but I totally understand it. I do like Jarquez Hunter, though. He is Auburn's workhorse running back. He's going to be their primary back. He's had double-digit carries in every single game. He needs positive game script to get more carries. And with this projected to be a 4.5-point spread, that's pretty good for Auburn lately. He is, should be pretty effective against this Missouri team. Missouri could not stop the run at all against Texas A&M. So I do expect Hunter to have some success. And 5,100 is the lowest price tag we've seen on him in quite some time. I do think he's one of the better points per dollar plays at the running back position on this slate. At the wide receiver spot for Auburn, there's only one guy I'm considering. It is Keandre Lambert-Smith. The Penn State transfer has come in and delivered on being their wide receiver. 8 targets against Georgia, caught 7 of them for 95 yards, and he's a big play waiting to happen. He has a lot of big plays on the season. So anytime you have a big play threat, it only takes him 1 or 2 plays to pay off his DraftKings salary. And, he's getting 7, 8, 9 chances to do so. So I really do like Keandre Lambert-Smith. I think that, Hunter and Lambert-Smith, as well as Thorne, are sneaky plays that are going to come in pretty low owned and could pay off in this game. On the Missouri side, they got Brady Cook at quarterback, and it's kind of just hard to get excited about him. He hasn't really had a ceiling game yet this season, no games above 26 fantasy points. In fact, at his salary of $7,100, you generally want about 3 times the value of their salary to hit value on DraftKings. He's only produced 21 DraftKings points in 2 games out of 6 so far this season. That's not a good percentage. This Auburn defense is not great, but it's not bad. I think you would need a shootout for Brady Cook to end up, hitting value in this game. So I think if you're playing, the likes of Thorne or Lambert-Smith, playing Brady Cook on the other side makes a little bit of sense. And this does make for a little bit of a sneaky game stack, but really Cook does not have my interest outside of a stacky lineup like that. At the running back position, Missouri, for whatever reason, did not disclose that Nate Noel was out for their last game against UMass until like an hour after kickoff. The SEC requires injury reports for conference games, but apparently Eli Drinkwitz just said, hey, it's not a conference game. F it. I'm not doing an injury report. No one's going to know that Nate Noel's not playing. I had him in some FanDuel lineups on the early only slate, was still able to cash because the rest of the lineup was that good. But, really upsetting that, they really felt the need to keep that injury under wraps. I don't know if he's going to play in this game or not. He was their primary running back when he was active, but Marcus Carroll looked really good against UMass. And I got to say, if Noel is inactive, if we get news that Noel is not going to play, Marcus Carroll is a very appealing pick at $4,400. At the wide receiver spot, Luther Burden, a.k.a. LB3, is their guy, their best receiver, one of the best receivers in all of college football. But this spot is just not the best to me. Like, he seems quite likely to put up between 18 to 22 DraftKings points, but that's really not going to cut it at his salary of $8,100. To me, I consider him the same way I consider Brady Cook. He's a game stack play. Next game up, we've got Virginia heading to Clemson. Clemson is 21.5 point favorites in this game. Game total of 57.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 39 to 18 in favor of Clemson, with Clemson having the highest team total on the entire slate. For Virginia, their quarterback Anthony Colandrea is at a very solid price point. I played him a lot against Louisville, and he, kind of put through for his value, like solid 3 times value for his salary. And now they've downgraded him in a whole $1,000 for his salary. It's a tough matchup against Clemson, but they're still implied 18 points. So there's a chance that he could get you 2 or 3 touchdowns. And what we like about Colandrea, we've said this all season long, he is an aggressive quarterback, and he is a quarterback that will run. So if it starts going good for this Virginia offense, he has a chance to really excel with this salary. If it starts going bad for this Virginia offense, though, it could go real bad. So I think Colandrea has a really wide range of outcomes in this one, but he is going to make my player pool at $6,900. At the running back spot, this is a revenge game for Kobe Pace. He is a Clemson transfer, but the bad news is that he is in like nearly a 50-50 split with Xavier Brown. Xavier Brown was the more effective back in totality against Louisville because he did have the long catch and run for a touchdown. I gotta say, it really makes playing Pace unappealing, knowing that Brown is eating into so many of those carries. And Brown, you don't necessarily like to play running backs against Clemson, but at only $3,100, if he scores a touchdown, he's pretty much going to instantly pay off his salary. So I don't mind it as a punt play at the running back position. At the wide receiver spot, you know what you're going to get from Virginia. Malachi Fields is the target monster. He had 17 of them against Louisville, ended up with 25.78 fantasy points in that game. Really solid day from him. And I think he's a solid play just because of the volume that he's going to see. If you're playing Colandrea, he's got to be the stacking partner. Now, they are supposed to get slightly healthier at the wide receiver position in this game. The last game they played, Trell Harris and Chris Tyree were both out. Chris Tyree, their starting slot is supposed to be back for this one. I was high on him in the preseason, but I'm not sure if I can get there on this slate at 3,500. But in terms of Virginia's reserve receivers, Andre Green was the guy that stepped up against Boston College and played a lot. And then Tyler Neville stepped up against Louisville and played a ton, 7 catches for 64 yards, 9 targets in that game. So I don't mind Neville or Tyree really as a punt play here on this slate on the Virginia side. On the Clemson side, so last week, we talked about how the previous few weeks, how it wasn't going so good for us on the Saturday main slate. The night slates had, for the most part, been pretty good. Well, last week was one of my best Saturday main slates in a long, long time. Didn't take down a GPP, but had a ton of lineups cashing, had a big-time profitable slate. And a big reason why is because of how I played the Clemson guys. And the reason why is, they were going into Wake Forest. They were implied to score 40 points. And whenever you have a really concentrated offense that focuses on 2 or 3 guys that's implied to score, 35, 40 points, those guys are all going to come through, or more often than not, those guys are going to come through. And so I played a lot of lineups that had Klubnik, Maffa, and Antonio Williams in them, and they combined for about 81 fantasy points on about, I believe, $16,000 salary. So they combined for, pretty much 4x value for their salary, which was insane. And really, people would come at me like, hey, Mike, like you played a lot of chalk, like the Clemson guys are really highly owned. Like, yeah, but if I play those 3 guys and they make 4x value for their salary. That puts me in such a good position that if the rest of my lineup hits, that's when I'm going to come through and win big. So don't worry about playing guys like this if they're chalky, if or whatever. Don't worry about playing certain combinations of guys like that, because if the offense scores a lot of points and you know that it's going to be concentrated around a few guys, then you're going to end up with a ton of fantasy points. And really, I could have done even better if I'd played Jake Brenningstool as a fourth option in this Clemson offense as opposed to just their big three. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about these Clemson guys. So Cade Klubnik, he was a big part of those lineups last week. 30 fantasy points against Wake, took care of business. They're implied for 39 points in this one. Virginia is a pretty solid run defense, but last game, Isaac Brown really ripped him apart for 146 yards and 7 yards per carry. So I don't really know whether Virginia's weakness is the run or the pass, but I do expect Klubnik to have a lot of success. I do expect Phil Moffitt to have a lot of success. Again, this offense is so concentrated that with Klubnik, and in fact, Klubnik running as well, and Moffitt being the workhorse running back, you know that if Clemson's going to put up points, it's going to come from them too. And then, by the way, the receiver room got a little bit more condensed last week. Bryant Wesco Jr. was out. I don't know if he's going to play this week or not, but when he was out, what you saw was more targets go by way of Antonio Williams, ended up with 24 fantasy points against Wake. More targets go to Jake Brenningstool, ended up with 26 fantasy points against Wake. And then, oh, by the way, a lot of targets to Tower Stellato. 7 targets, cost 6 of them for 72 yards and a touchdown, 19.2 fantasy points. And now he's only $3,000 even on DraftKings. Or did I call him Tower Stellato? I meant Troy Stellato. My bad. There's another Tower in Clemson's receiving core. There's also famous Tyler from Spartanburg that Dabo Swinney had the rant on. But pretty much like this Clemson offense, Klubnik has a chance to go off, 30 fantasy points in 4 of his last 5. You know that Moffitt has a chance to go off. He's the workhorse running back. And in the receiver room, I'm more than comfortable playing Williams, Brenningstool, and Stellato as my 3 guys if Wesco continues to be out. If Wesco's out, I think that means more fantasy goodness for those 3 guys. Next up, game number 3, we've got one of the best game environments on the slate. We've got Miami heading to Louisville to take on the Cardinals. Miami is currently 4-point favorites with a game total of 61.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 33-29 in favor of the Hurricanes. This is the highest game total on the slate. This is the game most likely to shoot out on the slate, in my opinion. Cam Ward's Miami's quarterback, and what can you say about Cam Ward? Like, he's just been great so far this season. 32 fantasy points or more in every single game, passed for over 300 yards in every single game, which is so valuable on DraftKings because you get 3-point bonus when you get 300 yards. And oh, by the way, he has rushing upside as well. And Louisville has defended rushing quarterbacks very, very poorly this season. So I do think that Cam Ward is a very playable quarterback, even at that salary of $10,800. There's no evidence to suggest that he would score under 30 fantasy points in this one. At the running back spot, Miami has Damian Martinez as their feature back, but I view him as a very touchdown dependent play. Like, if he scores a touchdown, congrats, he's going to hit value for you. If he doesn't, he's probably not going to do very good because he's not a very efficient running back, doesn't break off long runs, not very good in terms of a yards per carry perspective, not my kind of play. To me, the main argument in playing him would be leverage off of everybody who's playing Cam Ward, but Cam Ward's so expensive that I think that's going to keep his ownership down, and you don't need to go that far just to play a pivot. At the wide receiver spot for Miami, Xavier Restrepo is the very clear wide receiver 1. And it's going to continue to be that way. He's just their best guy. Think very highly of Restrepo. If you're playing Cam Ward, he's the most likely stacking partner. But there's been a little bit of a shakeup after him in this regard. Isaiah Horton is coming in where he has been pretty much the wide receiver 2 for 3 straight games now. He's up to $900 on DraftKings salary, but it seems like it's worth it. He's really taken over, had 11 targets last week. It really feels like he's turning into this offense's wide receiver 2. And so I don't mind playing Isaiah Horton as a stacking partner with Cam Ward. Jacoby George has kind of fallen from wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 3, but he's still an every down player in this offense, still getting a ton of usage. Sam Brown Jr. is not quite an every down player anymore, but he still gets thrown to quite a bit. A decent pivot play at 4,700 in my opinion. And then you've got the tight end Elijah Arroyo down here at 3,600 that I think is a solid value play as well. So I think if you're playing Cam Ward, you want to play him with at least 1, if not 2 of his pass catchers. And I know Cam Ward is expensive, but I do think there's enough salary savers on this slate that you can play Ward with 2 of those receivers and still find a way to make your lineup work. On the Louisville side, Tyler Shuck is a quarterback, and I don't feel like this is a great spot for him. He continues to go up in salary, but he continues to show us very little upside. He hasn't had a performance this season over 26 fantasy points, and he needs 24 to hit 3 times value. So I just don't see that big of a ceiling with Shuck. The Miami defense is one that is prone to giving up big plays. And to me, that reeks of, hey, I'm not going to play the quarterback on the other side. I'm going to play a running back or a wide receiver on the other side and hope that that running back or that wide receiver is the one that makes the splash plays, as opposed to trying to, play the quarterback and get all the totality. Speaking of which, Isaac Brown is Louisville's new RB1. He has been great the last 3 weeks, over 19 fantasy points on all 3 games, averaging about 25 fantasy points on DraftKings in those 3 games. Salary of only $5,600 is quite affordable. Miami's defense, like I said, they're pretty good, but they're prone to giving up big plays, and Isaac Brown is a guy who can make them pay with those big plays, and I think $5,600 is a very reasonable price tag. He's another guy that helped make me a lot of money last Saturday, and I'm going to go back to him even though he is more expensive on this slate. At the wide receiver spot for Louisville, there's only 2 guys we really have to talk about. Ja'Cory Brooks, the Alabama transfer, has been their wide receiver 1 throughout the entire season. Kind of got unlucky and didn't score a touchdown against Virginia. If he did, it would have been a really good fantasy day. To me, he is the guy that's quite likely to break off a big play against this Miami defense. But don't sleep on Colin Lacey. We've been talking about him the last few weeks. He is back now. He is $4,200 on DraftKings, which is more than what he's been. But remember, this is a guy who was one of the best receivers in all of college football at South Alabama last season, one of the most targeted receivers in all college football at South Alabama last season. And so if he comes in and starts taking over the role that we expected him to take over in the preseason, then that $4,200 price tag is going to get smashed. He is going to make my player pool yet again. And, maybe I'm wrong, but I just think that there's a ton of upside there for a guy only $4,200. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick breather so that way I can take a coughing break, and then we are going to get to the rest of these games. So I do think I did a really good job of holding those coughs in and not letting it affect my talking. But anyway, that's beside the point. I do want to mention before we get to the next game, there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you reach out to me on there. Also, I'm recording this on a Tuesday night, and the slate doesn't kick off till Saturday. So sometimes injury news happens. Sometimes different kind of stuff happens that changes opinions on players. If you want to get my thoughts, reach out to me. Also in the Fantasy Corner Discord, link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Fantasy Corner Discord is a community of a lot of really good, really smart people who play DFS for a lot of different sports, and we're always in there talking strategy, talking plays, and then sweating it out together. And the college football chat in there lately has been great. There's been some people that have won a lot of money. And so if you're looking for people to talk DFS, but specifically college football DFS, but we got the other sports covered as well, join the Fantasy Corner Discord. Also, I do write an article for my Patreon for every single college football DFS slate, including the midweek slates, by the way, where I profile my core plays as well as why they're my core plays, using X's and O's ownership, basically really dialing down why I'm playing those guys. I can't just sit here and guarantee that you can just insert those guys into your lineup and win thousands of dollars and print money. It's not that easy. Anybody who promises that is lying. But what I can promise is that you can get information from somebody who does a lot of research and knows what they're talking about when it comes to this stuff and can help you get better at your process playing college football DFS. All right, so let's go ahead and continue with game number 4, which is going to be Nebraska taking on Indiana. I did not have this being one of the marquee games of the day back in the preseason, but here we are. Indiana's had a really good run. Nebraska's actually not playing so bad themselves. Indiana is 6.5-point favorites in this game with a game total of 50.5 points, meaning the implied total is Indiana 29-22. This is a deceptively high total to me. I saw this and I immediately thought, wow, Vegas wants me to bet the under in this game. I don't see these teams accounting for 50.5 points. I just don't. But hey, that's where Vegas has the line set at. They don't really play at a fast tempo. The defenses are pretty solid. I don't know. The way the total is set up, though, it makes for a very appealing game stack because Nebraska is very cheap. Dylan Raiola is only $4,700. We talked about him all season long, how he was very expensive at the start of the season, but he wasn't providing value for his price tag. Well, guess what? Now he's only $4,700. Now he only needs 15 fantasy points to do so. He could absolutely do that. Especially if this game does end up getting to the total. Nebraska's implied to score 22 points. If he accounts for 2 of those 3 touchdowns, then absolutely he could hit value. I don't think he's a terrible play. Nebraska does employ a running back committee, though. Just an update on it. Last game, Dante Dowdell and Emmett Johnson both had 14 carries. Indiana's a fairly tough defense. Nebraska's expecting to be playing from behind. I don't really think I'm going to be getting to either Dowdell or Johnson in this game. At the wide receiver spot, though, Nebraska does have some cheap options pretty much the entirety of the season. Isaiah Nair and Jamal Banks have been their 2 guys. Really, in recent weeks, it's been more so Banks than Nair, but they're both talented players. They're both big play threats. They're really the only 2 guys I would consider, but like I said, it's a really cheap stack if this game does end up hitting its total to go with Raiola and then Nair and Banks or one of the 2, something like that. Because on the Indiana side, the players aren't all that expensive either. Curtis Rourke is $7,400, and To me, he's a touchdown-dependent play at the quarterback position. This is not an offense that is going to throw the ball 30 times a game. They're just not, or 40 times a game, I should say. They've thrown it 30 times a game, quite a lot, actually. But they're not an offense that's going to throw it 40 times a game. They're just not. He's also not a super mobile quarterback. So really, you need multiple touchdowns from Curtis Rourke in order for him to hit value at his salary. They're implied 29 points. He could absolutely do it. He's been playing very well. He's been very efficient. I don't think he's an awful play, but I don't think he's the best play on the slate. At the running back position, this is another big-time committee between Ellison, Lawton, and Kaelon Black. It's just really hard to make out who's going to be the one that actually has the big game. Justice Ellison is the most consistent. He is the one that always goes out there first, for what it's worth. To me, if I were to play any of them, it would be him. But to me, Kaelon Black is a little bit intriguing because Black and Lawton both transferred to Indiana from James Madison, where Black was very clearly the RB1 for most of their time that they spent there together. So I think that there might be a Kaelon Black game sometime before the end of the season, but I don't think it's going to be against Nebraska. Nebraska's a decent defense. Now, if I'm going to be playing Curtis Rourke, there are three receivers that I would consider stacking him with. The first one is Elijah Surratt. He's another James Madison transfer here in this offense, but he has been their most targeted receiver of the season, continues to be their best wide receiver week in and week out. 3 of the 6 games he has played, he's been over 23 fantasy points. So if he gives you another one of those games, he's an absolute smash at his salary of $5,200. Miles Cross, the Ohio transfer, is another one that I think you've got to consider. He has kind of come on lately and been more of a contributor to the passing game than he was at the start of the season. And then Keyshawn Williams, the Wake Forest transfer, is another guy that 3 of the 5 games that he has played in have resulted in more than 14 fantasy points, which would absolutely smash his salary. To me, like I said, this is a super cheap game stack where you can get Rourke and one of these receivers, and then Raiola and one of his receivers, and you can pay up for pretty much the best of the best at the rest of your positions. Next up, we've got UCLA and Rutgers, and I got to be honest, this is like, I don't even want to talk about this game. This is basically like, you'll know how I feel about Iowa, where Iowa games, you never want to play guys in from DFS because Iowa is so inept offensively and they're so good defensively that it just creates horrible game environments. Well, if Iowa is Iowa, Rutgers is like East Iowa. UCLA is like West Iowa. These two teams just are not going to make a good game environment. I'm not interested in playing anybody from this game. Rutgers is 4.5-point favorites. The game total is 40.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 23-18 in favor of Rutgers. UCLA, they're just bad. Ethan Garbers is back to being the starting quarterback, and it's just not been great. I have no interest in playing him. TJ Harden is the running back. What is redeeming about him is that he does have usage in the passing game, but he scored 1 touchdown on the season. He needs to score touchdowns if he wants to hit value in DraftKings, and 1 on the season ain't cutting it. So he's probably a pass for me. At wide receiver, they are supposed to be getting more healthy, UCLA at wide receiver, which to me just muddies things. I don't really know who's going to be playing what snaps. So it's just a pass for me. On the Rutgers side of things, they're a little more playable. Ethan Kaliak-Manis at quarterback is a hard pass. He's way too expensive for what he does. At the running back position, I do really like Kyle Monongai. He is just a really solid, really efficient workhorse runner that he's going to get 20 carries in this game. And if he does, he has a chance to absolutely smash. Rutgers implied for 23 points. Who's to say he doesn't score all 3 touchdowns? I think he's a pretty solid play at the running back spot. He's really the only guy from this game that I'm considering getting to, because for the wide receiver spot at Rutgers, Demir Miller is their wide receiver 1, but he's not getting any kind of yardage recently. It's all been dink and dunk stuff. The tight end, Kenny Fletcher, has been used quite a bit as well, but again, not a whole lot of yards there. Isaiah Strong is also a guy who's playing a ton, but just not really outputting any kind of performances. So, those 3 guys you can consider, but it's probably going to be a pass for me. Next up, we've got South Carolina taking on Oklahoma. This is another game that's probably going to be a pass for me. Oklahoma is 3-point favorites, game total 40.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 22-19 in favor of the Sooners. South Carolina, they are relying a lot on the legs of Lenora Sellers. He played what I thought was quite well against Alabama, put up 16 fantasy points, but 16 fantasy points ain't going to cut it at a salary of $6,000. DraftKings raised his salary to me a little bit out of his price range, and Oklahoma's a pretty good defense. So I'm not really buying him at that salary. Rocket Sanders is back to being the workhorse at running back, $4,700. Even though Oklahoma's a tough matchup, I'm really buying Sanders at that price tag. I think he's a really good price-adjusted play at the running back position. At wide receiver, I don't really want to trust any of them. I just don't. Bennett Jr. did have a decent game against Alabama. Nick Harbor finally showed up against Alabama. catching a deep touchdown. Gage Larvadane, the transfer from Miami of Ohio, continues to play more, but I can't advocate for playing any of those guys. On the Oklahoma side, I have no interest in playing really any of these guys either. So Texas showed the blueprint for playing against Oklahoma while Michael Hawkins Jr. is their starting quarterback and while all of their receivers are injured. They just said, hey, we're going to load the box and we're going to dare you to throw the ball. And then when it is situations where we know you're going to throw the ball because you're going to be in 3rd and long, we're going to put 2 QB spies on Michael Hawkins and make sure that he can't run. And we're going to play man coverage and dare these receivers to beat us man to man. And they couldn't. And Oklahoma couldn't move the ball. Their offense was totally stymied. They did not score an offensive touchdown. That's the game plan that teams are going to use against them. And I'm not going to play Michael Hawkins Jr. until he shows he can beat it. It is a nasty committee at running back. Barnes did have 14 carries against Texas, but it didn't do anything. At the wide receiver spot, the one piece of good news is that they are supposed to get Deion Burks back. This is a receiver who can beat man coverage. This is a receiver who can actually make a defense pay if they load the box. It's to be determined if he's actually going to play, but if he does play, I think he's the only guy from this Oklahoma side that I would consider. Next up, let's go ahead and talk about game number 7, which is much more interesting than the last two. Alabama taking on Tennessee. Alabama is currently 3-point favorites with a game total of 56.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 30-27 in favor of Alabama. This game has some shootout potential, not because I think both of the offenses have been good so far this season, but because I think both these defenses are very suspect. Alabama's secondary is not good. Tennessee's secondary is quite unproven, and against Florida, they did not look good. An actual passing offense can really make Tennessee pay. Tennessee's front 7 is really, really good, though. You're not going to run the ball in Tennessee. And so really, I think that Jalen Milroe, even at $10,500, is a really high upside play. He's going to be able to air the ball out against this Tennessee team. This is a game that can shoot out. And Milroe in shootouts is exactly what you want because he's going to be running it. He's going to be throwing it. And he has the upside to put up 50 fantasy points in a game because he did it against Georgia. So I do think that Milroe is a very high upside play. I have no problem playing him. I think a lot of people, when you look at the slate as a whole, are going to opt to play Cam Ward over Milroe. And I'll take a low on Jalen Milroe any day of the week. At the running back spot, it's still a two-way committee between Haynes and Miller for Alabama. Their offensive line has not been great run blocking. It's a 50-50 split. Milroe vultures some touchdowns. Hard pass for me. At the wide receiver spot, Ryan Williams is turning into their wide receiver 1. A little bit of a letdown game against South Carolina, but he is still the guy that I would say is the big play threat in this offense. Whereas Jeremy Bernard had a really good game against South Carolina, 18.9 fantasy points. He's a guy who is going to catch a lot of the short intermediate targets in this offense. And I think $4,100 is a steal of a price tag on him. I think that it really makes Milroe a lot more stackable. That Milroe is expensive and you can get Bernard for $4,100. And with the injuries to Prentice and Law and then possibly not playing this game, it doesn't open up any interest in any other players for me. It really just makes me value Williams and Bernard that much more. And I think that a Milroe-Bernard stack is very appealing on this slate to me. On the Tennessee side, Nico Iamaleava is just not – he hasn't been good. Like, all of his good games were against crappy defenses, against Chattanooga and against NC State. He hasn't done anything since. But this Bama secondary is quite bad. And I think that if there were a time for him to show up, this would be it. I was hoping we would get more of a price discount because just simply the algorithm has to factor in how bad he's been the last 4 games, but it hasn't. He's overpriced, but if this game shoots out, he absolutely has a chance to hit value at that salary of $8,000. At the running back spot, Dylan Sampson is a beast. So we've talked about him multiple times on the show, and I'll reiterate again if anybody hasn't heard it. The Tennessee offense last year utilized a 3 running back committee where all 3 of them were quite productive, and all 3 of them were usually very cheap on DraftKings. Right now, Dylan Sampson is basically getting all 3 of that running back production by himself because he's really the only one that they're running. And while I do think it is difficult to run on Bama, they've shown that at the goal line, they're just going to give it to Dylan Sampson 2, 3, 4 times in a row and let him get in the end zone. So $8,700, I think he's got a ton of touchdown equity, but I don't necessarily think he's the best overall play on the slate because I do think Bama's going to shut down the run. At the wide receiver spot, this is where it gets interesting for Tennessee. Their limited passing offense has been not great so far this season, but Dante Thornton is the big play threat. Chris Brazell is still a guy who routinely leads the team in targets. Brew McCoy is a starter that is routinely too cheap on DraftKings. But the guy that I'm the most interested in, and I said this last week, and I was pretty right about it, even though he didn't have a big game, I was still overall right about it, is Squirrel White. He's coming off of a 7-catch game and a 5-catch game where he hasn't scored a touchdown, and because of that, that's limited his overall DraftKings scoring. But he's only $3,800. If he just does either of those 2 games again, he's going to hit value at that salary. And I think he's one of the best price-adjusted wide receiver plays on the slate. I think that a Milroe, Bernard, White, 3-person stack is super cheap. It allows you to get to a lot of other options. You can even fill it with other Tennessee guys if you wanted to. But to me, he's the most appealing option in this Tennessee side. All right, let's take a quick little breather, and then let's get to the last 5 games. Quick reminder, if this video has helped you out in any way, please hit the like button on YouTube as well as rate and review on audio. It really does help me out a ton when you guys do that, and I cannot stress it enough. It helps the video and the channel show up in searches, helps more people find the content, which helps grow the community, and I cannot stress enough. I love it when you guys do that. And really also, let me know your thoughts in the comments, because those also attract more viewership to the rest of the videos, and YouTube finds videos that have more comments. That, they put them at the higher bar of searches. So just help me out and let me know what you think. I'm more than happy to respond to your thoughts if you guys have some. So let's go ahead and get back to the last 5 games. We've got Notre Dame taking on Georgia Tech, which it looks like Notre Dame is going to be at Georgia Tech, but it's actually being played in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. And I have seen how Notre Dame does these games. It may seem like it's going to be a Georgia Tech home game in Atlanta, but Notre Dame has a very large alumni base. They have a very large base of fans. There's a lot of white Catholic people in the Midwest that love Notre Dame, and a lot of them live in Atlanta now. And so Notre Dame is going to pack this stadium, and they are going to make this feel like a Notre Dame home game. Do not get this twisted. Anyway, Notre Dame is 11-point favorites. The game total is 49.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 30-19 in favor of the Irish. And I think Notre Dame has gotten a little bit of a bad rap this season because of their limited passing offense and because of how many injuries they've had on both sides of the ball. But I don't really expect it to matter a whole lot in this game. They've had a lot of really young, talented players step up in place of these injuries, and their passing offense is a work in progress, but I do think eventually they are going to find it. But in the meantime, I don't really need them to find their passing offense to play Riley Leonard because he's such a weapon running the football. He's had 4 straight games of over 25 fantasy points, and a lot of it has come through his legs. He has scored a total of 7 rushing touchdowns in that stretch. He scored a total of 6 passing touchdowns in that stretch. So because of his legs, he is very fantasy viable. This game does have a little bit of shootout potential, and I do think that Leonard is going to use his legs in this one. I do expect him to be able to score a lot of fantasy points again. $8,100, I absolutely think there's a chance that he could hit 3x or 4x value at that salary. At the running back spot, relatively speaking, Georgia Tech's defense is better at defending the run than defending the pass. So I don't think this is a great spot for Jeremiah Love. But this is a guy who has scored a touchdown in every single game this season. This is a guy who seems to break off a long run in every single game. And he's very talented. So I don't think this is necessarily how you attack this Georgia Tech team. But $5,900, he does have a little bit of my interest. Jadarian Price also got a lot of usage against Stanford. I really don't think that they want to put a lot of tread on the tires of Jeremiah Love. So if you do think that this game gets out of hand early, Jadarian Price is worth a look at $3,300. And I think it might sound counterintuitive, but like a Leonard and Price stack makes a little bit of sense to me because you would bank on Leonard scoring some early touchdowns so that way they sit Jeremiah Love and Price gets more run later in the game. I just think that that's kind of a different angle that you could play this that nobody else is going to. At the wide receiver spot for Notre Dame, it's ugly. It's ugly. Their passing offense hasn't been that effective. They play a lot of different guys. No one has really stepped up as the wide receiver one. I can't really advocate for playing really any of these guys. If you want to, I guess Bo Collins has been their number 1 wide receiver. He's just a jump ball guy, which makes it really easy on Riley Leonard because he doesn't even have to be open to throw it to him. If you're looking to stack up Riley Leonard, which I don't think you have to do, Bo Collins is probably the most likely guy to produce. But also, don't sleep on Chris Mitchell. To me, if this Notre Dame passing offense is ever going to unlock themselves, it's going to be because of Chris Mitchell getting more playing time and more usage. He's their fastest receiver. He's their best game-breaking wide receiver, the guy that can break off explosive plays. And against Stanford, 4 catches, 32 yards, and a touchdown. It's the most usage he saw all season long. Don't sleep on Chris Mitchell. I think by the time the season's over, there's going to be a Chris Mitchell game at some point. Now, on the Georgia Tech side, biggest injury news of the slate is that Haynes King is currently questionable. He is their quarterback. He is the engine that makes their offense go, running as well as passing. He's really good, honestly. Like, he's one of my favorite guys to play in DraftKings because he gives you so much upside with his arm and with his legs. He's questionable, and if he doesn't play, this Georgia Tech offense takes a big hit. Zach Pyron is the backup. They use him this season because, quite frankly, he's just a very large man, and they bring him in at the goal line just to bash head first into the line of scrimmage and score touchdowns. It's why you see his runs be like 5 carries for 6 yards, 1 carry for 2 yards, 1 carry for 1 yard. Like, it's how they use him. I don't know if they open up the whole playbook to Pyron, honestly. That's kind of to be determined, but it makes the rest of the Georgia Tech skill players really uninteresting to me if Pyron is in fact the quarterback and not Haynes King. But I got to be honest, there's so few guys that have turned in fantasy viable performances against Notre Dame this season. You have Antonio Brown of Northern Illinois. You have Isaac Brown of Louisville. You have Colin Lacey of Louisville. Those are the only guys who've really hit, 3 times value against this Notre Dame defense so far this season. So it's really hard to advocate for playing a lot of Georgia Tech guys. I do like Justice Haynes. He is, he's kind of quarterback agnostic in my opinion, because he's going to see a ton of carries. He's going to get usage in the passing game. He's their workhorse running back. Maybe I can make an argument for playing him, and I don't think a lot of people are going to play him. But at the wide receiver spot, Rutherford and Singleton definitely take a big hit if Haynes King is not playing. But those are the only 2 guys I really needed to mention, because they're really the only 2 guys that Georgia Tech throws to. Next game up, we have Michigan taking on Illinois. Michigan is 3-point favorites with a game total of 43.5 points, which seems awfully high to me, meaning the implied total is about 23-20 in favor of Michigan. Let's talk about the Wolverines. So do we know who's going to start at quarterback for them? No. It could be Jack Tuttle. It could be Alex Orji. It could be Davis Warren. Do I care? No, I'm not playing any of them. I'm not doing the Alex Orji thing again. Yes, he's mobile, but yes, they don't use him in creative and innovative ways to take advantage of his mobility. So I'm not interested in any Michigan quarterback. What I think happened last game against Washington was they got down 14 points and they said, hey, Orji ain't bringing us back 14 points. We're going to have to throw. We're going to put in Tuttle. And so I don't know if that's actually a permanent switch, but I'm not interested. At the running back spot, I am very interested. Illinois is a very bad run defense. They just let Purdue rip off a lot of long runs against them. And now they get to play Michigan, who, oh, by the way, has 2 really good running backs. Khalil Mullings is their RB1. He's been the RB1 through most of the season. I think he's a great play at $7,000. Don't sleep on Donovan Edwards at $5,300 either. Last game, it was a dead 50-50 split between Mullings and Edwards. The only difference in the outcome, the production, which was Edwards 19 points, Mullings 4 points, was the fact that Edwards ripped off a long touchdown run, which was the difference between the 2 of them. And so really, I think that Edwards is dependent on a big play to hit home with his salary, but he's going to get enough of a workload that there's a chance he could hit that big play. And Mullings is going to just grind it out. I think he's a ton of touchdown equity. He's got 6 rushing touchdowns so far this season. So both of these guys are going to make my player pool, but again, in different ways. Mullings is like the most likely to score a touchdown. Edwards, if he rips off a big play, he's going to pay off for his salary. Wide receiver spot for Michigan. I mean, Colston Loveland had a really good game against Washington. He's their tight end. He's their best receiving option, but this is an ugly passing offense. No, I'm not going to play him. On the Illinois side, they've got Luke Altmaier at quarterback, and he's not bad. He's having a good season so far. Really good fantasy day against Purdue, but that was also Purdue. They're probably the worst team in all Power 4 football, in my opinion. I'm just not interested in playing him against Michigan. At the running back spot, Caden Fegan, who is basically like Derrick Henry if he were in an Illinois jersey. And then back at 20 years old. Basically, he's huge and he runs really hard. He may or may not play in this game. I'm not interested in playing him if he does, because I don't think that's stylistically how you want to attack this Michigan defense. Josh McCray, is the backup. He looked great against Purdue when Fegan was out. If Fegan is out again, I think McCray at $3,800 becomes intriguing. Not because I think that you can run on Michigan or I think it's a great strategic play or anything, but just because he's $3,800 and this offense is going to run the ball. At the wide receiver spot, they really do only throw to 2 guys, Pat Bryant as well as Zachary Franklin. Both of them have a chance of ripping off a big game. Both of them get a lot of targets. I don't know. I just don't think you necessarily want to play an Illinois guy going up against Michigan. Like, there's 12 games on this slate. There's 24 teams playing. Why would you want to play somebody against the Michigan defense? So I don't think I'm going to get to either of them. Next game up, we've got Colorado taking on Arizona, where Arizona is 3.5-point favorites with a game total of 57.5 points. That line smells fishy to me. I got to be honest. Like, I would have thought that Colorado was going to be favored in this game. I know it's at Arizona, but to me, 3.5 even is more so of a factor than the home field advantage. I don't get it. I did not think that was how this was going to go. Anyway, Arizona is implied to win this game 30-27. This game does have some shootout potential. We talked about Shedeur Sanders ad nauseum on this show. I think he's a solid play on this slate. Yes, he provides you next to no rushing upside, but he provides you a ton of passing upside. He's very likely to get 300-yard bonus, and he provides you a ton of touchdown equity because they're projected to score 27 points, and this team is allergic to running the football. So I do think that Shedeur Sanders is worth a look, even at $9,300. There's a chance that he could score you those 28 fantasy points to pay off his price tag, and he's got a lot of stacking options and a lot of game stacking options as well. At the running back spot, like I said, they're allergic to running the football. I think Dallin Hayden is the most talented of all the runners, but there's just so little rushing volume to go around because all they want to do is throw. That between Welch, Hayden, and Offerdahl, I'm just not going to play any of them. At the running back spot, what I do find is interesting is this. Travis Hunter is the number one wide receiving option for this team. He did leave the game early against Kansas State, but he's expected to be able to play this game against Arizona. To me, he's the most likely stacking partner with Shedeur Sanders. He's just very expensive. LeJounte Wester was really, really good against Kansas State, but I got to be honest, like really looking at the rest of the Colorado receivers, after Hunter, obviously, you got Wester, you got Horn, you got Shepard. It's just betting on which one of them is going to score the touchdowns. Like really, the actual passing volume of this team is so much that all of them are probably going to catch about 4 to 6 passes for about 40 to 70 yards. And if they score the touchdown, then they hit value. Like really look at Wester's game log, and that's pretty much the story, right? And Wester's been the one that scored the touchdown in 5 straight games. You look at Jimmy Horn's game log, and he hasn't scored since week 1, and he hasn't had a good fantasy performance since week 1, but he's been involved in the offense week in and week out because he's an every down player. Will Shepard has also, had some up and down games, but oh look, the 2 games he scored the touchdown, 19 fantasy points in both of those games. So I do think that if you're looking to stack Shedeur Sanders, if you feel confident about getting enough value plays elsewhere, you can play Travis Hunter. If not, you could go down to Wester, or you could go down to Horn Jr. or Will Shepard. I would be personally partial to Will Shepard amongst the 3. I think the price tag for, pretty much the same role in the offense is very viable. So to me, that would be what I would be looking at, is Will Shepard as a cheap stacking option. On the Arizona side, their quarterback is Noah Fafita, and he just hasn't looked good this season. Ever since the game against New Mexico in week 1, hasn't put up more than 16 fantasy points in a game. Colorado's defense, I think how you want to attack them is by running, not by throwing. So I don't think this is necessarily the greatest matchup either, but the game environment's very good. It's $6,200. He needs 18 DraftKings points to 19 DraftKings points to pay off his salary. I don't see it as the worst play, but I'll consider him a game stack play more than anything else. At the running back spot, Quali Conley is their guy. I think he's a great play because I do think you can run on this Colorado team. Kansas State showed that. North Dakota State showed that. Nebraska showed that. You can run on Colorado. And Quali Conley at $6,700, I think is a great play. His backup, Kedrick Riscano, has gotten a total of 26 carries in the last 3 games. That's nothing to sneeze at. At only $3,700, I think if you're playing GPPs and you're playing enough lineups, he's worth a dart throw. At the wide receiver spot, there's only one guy you can consider, and that is Tetairoa McMillan. He is the alpha in this offense. But Tetairoa McMillan in this game, they're going to shadow him with Travis Hunter. They are. So I don't think it's a great matchup individually for Tet. And maybe you could talk yourself into some of these other Arizona receivers, but they've been so bad this season. It's really hard to do that, honestly. Maybe Montana Lamonius Craig, who transferred from Colorado and did not leave on good terms, who had 6 targets last week against BYU and did score a touchdown. Maybe he's the guy you could talk yourself into, especially as a narrative-based play. But I don't know if I'll get there. Next up, we've got 2 more games. Next up is Baylor taking on Texas Tech. This one is projected to be Texas Tech as 6.5-point favorites with a game total of 55.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 31-25 in favor of the Red Raiders. On the Baylor side, Sawyer Robertson has taken this starting quarterback job and run with it. And I mean that quite literally. He's actually run the ball quite a bit. And he's been pretty good, 23, 34, 28, and 18 fantasy points in his 4 starts. That's 3 out of 4 games where he's hit salary big time, or hit value for his salary big time. So I don't have a problem playing him. I don't think the Texas Tech defense is very good. We have seen Cincinnati put up a lot of points against them. We have seen Arizona State put up points against them. So I do think that Sawyer Robertson is a pretty solid play, and I don't expect him to garner a lot of ownership just because he's not really like a sexy name to click. At the running back spot, the injuries making this backfield a little bit more thin in depth make them more playable in DFS. Bryson Washington did have 8 carries in their last game against Iowa State. He appears to be the guy, but Dawson Pendergrass has a role again. He had 9 carries in that game. So really, I think you consider both of them, especially if Reese and Richardson do end up missing, but they're not a team that's going to run the ball a ton. I would rather play Sawyer Robertson. And then at the wide receiver position, they've played a lot of different guys. Like they just really rotate a lot of guys. Josh Cameron has shown some upside. He had 34 fantasy points against BYU. Michael Trigg is the tight end. He is a mismatch matchup nightmare. Monterey Baldwin is their fastest receiver, most experienced wide receiver. Ashton Hawkins is continuing to see snaps as well. He had a big game against BYU also. And then Keytron Jackson Jr., 5 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown. He was the most productive wide receiver against Iowa State. So I just don't really know what to make of this receiver room. I think I might be playing Sawyer Robertson unstacked if I'm playing this Baylor offense in any different way. So next up, we've got the Texas Tech side, and this is a lot more clear to predict. At quarterback, they've got Baron Morton, who's always been good. He just hasn't always been healthy. And really, I'm pretty interested in him in a game where he's got 31 implied points. This offense is going to throw the ball. Not a bad look at $7,800 in my opinion. At the running back spot, you've got Taj Brooks. In my opinion, one of the best running back plays on the slate. This is, they get the rap for being an air raid offense that's going to throw the ball over the yard, but they do want to win by running at the end of the day, and it's with Taj Brooks. He is the workhorse running back. He's very likely to score a touchdown in this game. You can run on Baylor. 32 fantasy points in back-to-back games for what it's worth with Taj Brooks. I think he's in a really good spot at $8,400. He's one of the top running back plays on the slate, in my opinion. In fact, if you were to ask me, just say, hey, who is going to be the highest scoring running back at the end of the day on this slate, Taj Brooks would be my answer. So I do think he's a pretty solid play. At the wide receiver spot, it is pretty simple for Texas Tech. They really only throw to 3 guys. Josh Kelly has been the most productive receiver since the start of the season. Coy Eakin is a guy who has that connection as a high school teammate of Baron Morton. He can have a big game every now and then. And then Caleb Douglas has played more and more recently. Really good against Arizona, 5 catches for 116 yards. $4,000 only for Caleb Douglas, $4,900 for Eakin. Those are 2 really cheap stacking partners that you can get to with Baron Morton. Last game of the day is USC taking on Maryland. And in this one, I got to say, I'm kind of partial to the USC offense in this game. USC is 7-point favorites, game total of 56.5, meaning the projected total is about 32-25 in favor of USC. Look, weird things have happened this year with Big Ten teams traveling across the coast. USC is doing that this week. That's the only nit you can pick in them, though. Maryland's defense has been really bad. They let Northwestern run up and down the field on them, throwing, running, doing everything. So I think USC is going to put up a lot of points in this one. And Miller Moss at $7,200, he hasn't been the best this season, especially since Big Ten play has started. But I think this is the best matchup he's had in a long time. And I think this Maryland secondary is really bad. $7,200, he's going to make my player pool for sure. Another guy that's going to make my player pool is Woody Marks. 20.5 fantasy points against Penn State. Kind of got unlucky that he didn't score a touchdown, but this is a guy who's likely to see between 15 and 20 carries, likely to be used in the passing game. $7,400. I see him as a very high floor play, in all honesty, and I do think you can run on Maryland. Hey, I also think you can throw on Maryland. Quentin Joyner deserves mention because he did break off the long run for a touchdown against Penn State, but that was only one of 3 carries on the day. He's not a big-time factor in this offense. Woody Marks is the guy that you want. At the wide receiver spot, they're kind of tricky to predict. They really are. But the longer the season goes on, Jacoby Lane had the big game against Wisconsin. He's been very quiet since. Zachariah Branch is very highly touted as a recruit, big play threat, has been quite quiet so far this season. Kyron Hudson is questionable coming into this one, but he actually has been fairly productive over the last 2 games. Deuce Robinson is another guy that you got to consider because he kind of just gets that like hybrid wide receiver tight end usage, has 2 games over 12 fantasy points, but like it's been kind of ugly among the USC receivers, right? But the guy that I would want to recommend the most is Mekhi Lemon. I think he's a straight misprice on DraftKings. 9 targets against Penn State, caught 6 of them for 73 yards, was their most productive receiver in that game. If I play any USC receiver stacked or unstacked with Miller Moss, it's going to be Mekhi Lemon. He's only $3,000. That is my recommendation for this USC offense. On the Maryland side, they have got Billy Edwards Jr. at quarterback, and really this USC defense hasn't looked great either. And you know that this Maryland team, they're going to throw the ball a ton. It's what they've done since back the days of Talia Tagovailoa being there, Little Tua. And so Edwards is a guy that I think has a little bit of upside. I think this is a sneaky game stacking option. I would rather play Miller Moss than Edwards, but I do think Edwards is in play. At the running back spot, Nick Singleton continued the streak of every Big Ten running back having success against this USC run defense. Hemby is a guy who doesn't see a ton of volume. We really thought he was going to see more volume than this coming into the year because of Maryland no longer having Talia Tagovailoa and hopefully going a little bit more run heavy. They haven't. But if Hemby does see like a 15 carry game, he's going to continue that streak of all Big Ten running backs having very solid games against this USC run defense. At the wide receiver spot for Maryland, it's also quite easy. Ty Felton is their guy. He's going to see the most targets. He's going to likely be the most productive, but don't count out Caden Prather. I think he is quite frankly underpriced. He's had 4 straight games this season, over 14 DraftKings points. That's pretty solid, and he's going to get quite targeted also along with Felton because they pretty much only throw to those 2 guys. So to me, this is a really easy game to stack from the Maryland side because they are a very condensed offense. On the USC side, they do a lot through Woody Marks, but really at the wide receiver spot, I really do like Mekhi Lemon, and I could definitely see myself playing a few players from this USC Maryland game at the end of the day. All right, but that's going to do it for this episode, guys. So thank you guys for staying with me through this point. Hopefully my voice made it through. I don't know how I sound at this point. I can't really tell. I'm kind of running on fumes at this point. But anyway, if you like this video, if it gave you some quality information, please hit the like button on YouTube. It helps me out a ton when you guys do that. If you're listening on audio, please rate and review. It helps me out a ton. Remember, you can get more information from me. Follow me on Twitter. Reach out to me on Twitter if you have any questions. Join the Fantasy Corner Discord. Articles on the Patreon if you want to know who actually makes my lineups at the end of the day. But that's how you can get more from me. Remember to subscribe to the channel. That way you can be with us for the rest of the slates that we do, not just the Saturday main slates and all the future college football slates. And oh, by the way, we're less than a month out from college basketball, which we're going to be covering pretty big time as well. So you'll get that if you subscribe to the channel also. But that's going to do it for this episode, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and give my voice a break. Hopefully we gave you guys all the information you need to know in order to build some winning lineups for this main slate. Best of luck to you guys on this Saturday main slate. Make it a good one. Hopefully I'm going to be able to continue the streak that I started last week of profitable main slates. We'll see how it goes. But thank you guys for watching the list to this point, and I will see you guys next time.